Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone to today's Monadnock Broadband Group meeting. Don't have a huge crowd today, so let's start out with just quick introductions, name and organization or community. I'll start. My name's Henry Underwood, and I'm a planner at Southwest Region Planning Commission. If this is your first meeting, we're helping provide staff support, administrative support to this group. Let's start on this side. Dana?
It's Dana.
Yeah, or whatever you like.
Hello. Dana Finney Fitzwilliam was part of an exploratory group to start the process to bring broadband to Fitzwilliam.
I'm Kim Field, and I'm also from Fitzwilliam.
Mitch Carole, Chairman of the Planning Board and Chair.
I'm Steve Campbell. I'm from Lyme, New Hampshire, home of LymeFiber.
Carole Monroe. I'm the chair of the board for ValleyNet, and I do community outreach for ValleyNet. And I also I'm on the broadband committee for Dublin, and we have some stories there as well.
I'm Brad Roscoe from Chesterfield. We're supposed to know we've got fiber going in already.
I'm Andrew Manival. I chair the broadband committee in Harrison.
I'm Rod Bouchard. I'm the Assistant County Administrator for Cheshire County, and I'm also a member of the Walpole Broadband Committee.
I'm David Vermont, Hancock Broadband Committee. Matthew Hale, Hancock Broadband Committee.
Mary Covington, Hancock Broadband Committee.
Campbell of LymeFiber, Senator Keene's office.
Bobby Graham, Office of Senator Hassett.
Christine Arledue, Temple Broadband Committee.
Dana Now, Temple.
Tom Giancola, Congressman Custer's office.
Michelle Cota, Senator Sheen's office.
And Todd Corner, Southwest Region Planning Commission.
And Senator Jean Deach, District 9.
Thanks everyone for the intros. Lot of familiar faces and regulars, but we're always gaining at least a couple of new members at each meeting. So just a quick recap of the Monadnock Broadband Group last time. Last met about 2 months ago, and the two key presentation topics were Broadband Bonding 101. We had a presentation delivered by New Hampshire Bond Bank and their staff attorney, and as well as a presentation from across the Connecticut River, Robert Fish of their Department of Public Service, talking about their Broadband Innovation Grant Program. And again, this was a kind of a snow day. We recorded the webinar. There's some great presentation material that you can watch through via our website, swrbc.org/broadbandgroup. Can everyone hear me okay? Good enough in the back? Okay. So kind of two bigger parts of the agenda today. Some legislative activity in this session. The goal of this kind of content is to spend maybe 5 or 10 minutes on, there's at least 3 bills relative to broadband this season, what they're about, what's their schedule, where are they being discussed. All these are in the Senate. And we'll hear presentations on kind of a topic people expressed some interest in at our previous meeting. What models are out there nearby, but outside of our region to improve broadband? And again, you'll hear about that more later. Just diving right into the legislative updates. Again, these are kind of brand new this session. There are 3 handouts on the table if you'd like to pick one up. And if you received a copy of this electronic agenda, you can link right out to the New Hampshire page to read more about these. But the first, and one we heard a bit about from Senator Deach last time, was to propose the establishment of communication districts. Since we're lucky to have Senator Deach and Carole Monroe with us today, I'd actually just like to invite them to provide a little bit of an overview and kind of a status update. For example, if there are meetings coming up that the group should be aware of, and hopefully leave a time for a couple of questions if folks are hearing about this just for the first time. And so invite maybe Senator Deitch to you're welcome to.
Well, I can start, and then I'll let Carole take over with the details. So the goal of the communications districts is to let towns work together to attract a provider, particularly for towns who are feeling like they're not having much luck on their own. And so our original bill was designed on the Vermont model. So, and I will let Carole tell you in more detail, but basically that is collecting money either through private loans or grants or some kind of startup money, setting up a district organization that actually handles that money, and there is no taxpayer participation from towns. We're now adding an amendment which is going to have allow another model, more like what's being done in Chesterfield. And so the hope is that among those two models, towns will have the flexibility to decide which way they want to go. And this will speed along the process. It takes huge amounts of time, but it's just one more tool in the tool shed. And I'll let Carole give you the details.
Sure. So last time you heard Robert Fish from Vermont talk a little bit about communication union districts in Vermont. And so what we did here in New Hampshire is we modeled this language after sewer districts in New Hampshire. So there really are some differences between the two. This is the New Hampshire way. And so the first piece of the model is revenue bonding model, but that assumes you get startup funding from a source. And then you get to a point in your construction and build and customer take rate revenue in order to then get to go out to get revenue bonds for the remaining towns in the district. In that model, there are no taxpayer dollars involved. The district is totally responsible for its debt, and the debt is paid with revenue from the district. We added the general obligation bonds. That's what we're doing on an amendment, because there are a number of towns and a number of districts who might want to go and build that startup with a general obligation bond from each town. That does put that on the onus on the taxpayer at that point in time, although the way that model works is there's an access fee attached to the services, and that access fee pays the bond. Okay, and the CCI model, they supplement that the first 3 or 4 years so that there's enough to pay the bond those first 3 or 4 years as it's ramping up. And that could be true for other providers as well. So it is a bill that gives towns an option to work together, but also to get together and create critical mass to make themselves more attractive to carriers and to sort of aggregate demand, right? And so there are a number of carriers out there. GWI in Maine is a good example, who would love to do this in New Hampshire but doesn't want to do it one town at a time. They're perfectly willing to come in and assist towns from the very beginning as a startup, but they want to do it as a district. And they're very tied into the USDA and RUS funding opportunities for all of northern New England. And that's how they've done it in Maine, and that's what they're talking about doing in New Hampshire. But that's just one example. And then there are others that just want to do one town at a time. I think we've all had some of us have had experience with matrix communications, and they're an option as well, but they're really focused on the one town at a time approach. And in that approach, my concern is that we will be cherry picking those that are the most attractive, and the smallest towns with the least populations but with the greatest need will again be left behind. And so that's one of the reasons why, if we can move towards a district approach, then those small towns will have an opportunity to get together with a larger town next door or a series of small towns together and create a critical mass to be a viable entity moving forward, feasible to account for their own broadband and revenue. So that's the purpose of it, and we're hopeful that it will go through. So it requires
Yeah, so it will go to the Senate first, of course, and it is not yet scheduled. So we'll probably get the amendment in this week, and I'm guessing the hearing will come next week because we're trying to rush things through. But as I said, it hasn't been scheduled yet, so but it will be in the near future. It has support. It's a bipartisan bill. Jeff Bradley supports it. I'm pretty sure the governor is not going to veto a broadband bill. So I think that we should be in good shape.
But no one likes to count their chickens before they're hatched.
Yeah,
So when we announce the day of the hearing, if the towns here, particularly the towns that might think this is an option for them, they might be a smaller town, or they have smaller towns next door to them that could be enveloped into their broadband projects, that we get up there to speak at these hearings. I mean, it's really critical for the legislative representatives to hear from all of us.
That's true. The more towns that are visible at the meeting, the more convincing it will be, the more clamorous, squeaky wheel. Yeah.
Do the towns have to be contiguous?
They don't. It's helpful if they are, because then you share backhaul and a number of other types of resources. But they don't have to be directly contiguous. In Vermont, there are some towns that were not contiguous initially. They are now because we picked up a town in between. But Montpelier right now for the East Central Vermont Telecom District, which we'll hear about later, is still an outlier. It's not contiguous.
Forgive me if I missed this, but were you suggesting that a town that's gone along like the Chesterfield model could morph into a district after it's already established its approach?
I think you need to do it before you send out the RFPs.
So the answer would be no, that can't be done.
Because the responses to the RFPs, unless the entity that you've chosen is willing to then look at a district approach, they're responding to an RFP for that one town. And you might get a different response to those RFPs if they knew it was a much larger area.
I just wonder if, for example, a town like Harrisville, if it went the way of Chesterfield, and Nelson, that didn't have anything, wanted subsequently to create a district, would we be sort of the mothership of the project and create it notwithstanding the contract?
Yes, but as I said, if you've already selected a vendor, that really will have a lot to do with that.
Okay.
I think what Carole was saying earlier is that, when you go town by town, you're cherry picking, and that means the outlying areas become less desirable. That's why you really need to get together before.
And you know that I come from a town that decided to do it alone, right?
Yeah.
And it was partially because, like Chesterfield, I think we were early, Chesterfield was first, but we're early in the game of trying to make this work and see what we could do. And by the time we gave the district concept a thought that we could get this legislation through, we were well on our way to doing it on our own. So do I feel a little guilty? I do, because I know there are towns like Nelson who could be left out in the cold, as they have in the past been, because they're so small. So, but we need to try and remedy this situation.
So you have to create the district first before you go with the RFP?
Well, the very first thing I would do for all of you is get your RFIs out. Let's figure out how many are unserved or served. But yes, and then you could start to decide whether a district makes sense. And I have worked with CCI in Carroll County, and they are willing to consider a district concept. They weren't originally. Originally they were like, no, we got to look at one town at a time. But they have now come to the same conclusion I have, which is there are a lot of towns in New Hampshire that are unserved. Many of them in the western part of the state and in the North Country, the Lakes region in the North Country. And if we do this one town at a time, we'll be doing this in 50 years. They won't, people, they just can't do them fast enough. And so if we can create some districts, then so even CCI is seeing that makes sense for them, because then they can look at it as a whole. What would it take as a whole to do this area?
So you can see the process for the Vermont approach in here. You picked up 457. And the amendment will be available. I can distribute it to SWRP and folks can distribute it to everyone so that you can see the other approach, the taxpayer-based approach.
Is there a threshold for unserved, in other words, or is it just the economics of the?
When that gets to the next bill.
Yeah. But when you go to the revenue model, when you go with revenue bonds, no, there isn't any. There is no threshold. Our bonding language for general obligation bonds says you can only do general obligation bonds for any area that's not served by 25.3. Right? And that's the threshold. But revenue bonds are not done by the same bond bank, and it doesn't have the same threshold. But you're already a district, you've gotten your funding through USDA or RUS for startup funding, and you have revenue flowing. And we'll talk a bit about what that takes when I talk about ECFiber. But
I was also wondering about the threshold of coverage of the unserved within a town. So in other words, what portion obviously falls under 25, but how much of a percentage is that of the town, that's covered or not covered, or if it's a district, is there any threshold around how much unserved you have to have across that district, or it's just the economics? On the general obligation, it's just the economics of it.
even in the revenue model, it's about the economics and critical mass. And so in towns like Hancock, that's partially served by cable, or in towns like, I'm going to use Peterborough as an example, that's probably 3/4 served with cable, not
60%.
quite 60%. Then those towns would be hard pressed to go, we always call it, Brad, the Chesterfield route, because there's a portion of town that needs to be served, but they could join a district to have that unserved area get served within the district.
Yeah, and that's clearly the situation as you described in Hancock and Peterborough. And it seems like the early adopters here, at least from a consolidated perspective, are those towns that have a very high percentage of unserved, or just don't have a cable operator or whatever. Yeah.
Actually, the idea that it has to be high percentages is false. We were only 16% underserved with economics per capita.
Yes.
16%, yes.
Right.
But to upgrade those 16% of people to broadband specs costs as much as doing the whole town.
Right. But you also have more houses or more addresses than a lot of these other towns too. So that when you look at the bill and you try to distribute it across those addresses, it worked in Chesterfield, but it doesn't work in others.
It's not a guarantee to work everywhere, but you got to go through the numbers. You just can't say, well, we only have 20% are underserved and we won't work. You have to go through the numbers.
Yeah.
We want to do the other.
Yeah, let's leave it at that for now. If we have more time later, we can talk a little bit more. This is definitely maybe the more dense of the three bills. And I'll say these next two will be a little shorter. We don't have a bill sponsor or other to cover them in detail, so I'm going to introduce the basics, and I definitely invite anyone from the audience to help with the interpretation, contribute more. But if you're following through on the sheets, 459 is about determining access to broadband. You can see some of the details, the legislative service requests that initiated it, the committee assignment right now. I believe this is the case as with the previous bill. No meeting or public hearing has taken place at the committee level yet. And as we hear about those, we can share them out to the group in case you're interested in attending.
Do you want me to comment on that one?
Sure.
Sure.
Oh, I can, well, here, I'll just do the basics really briefly for those of you who have a handout. the kind of 2 points defining areas where broadband providers don't respond to a request for information. This amendment to the legislation about broadband infrastructure bonds says that if a provider doesn't respond within 60 days to a municipal request, that provider is considered not serving the areas in town. My understanding is before there was a timeline, but there wasn't an express statement about determining whether or not an area was served. The second component of the legislation is on the second page, and it would add new language to allow, as I understand it, our Department of Safety to provide better address information to communities working to determine who is served and where. There are a couple exemptions right now for them to share address data with DES, for law enforcement, and this SB 459 proposes making one more exception for communities mapping and understanding where broadband is. So that's kind of the high level.
Sure.
Carol?
So in the first situation, that came up because the number of the cable providers refused to respond to their RFI. And so what that did is it says, we know that CCI, who did respond, has this coverage for broadband in that town. We know there's cable in the town. We know that cable provides probably 25.3, right, which is that broadband level, but they're not responding to an RFI. And what this basically says is that they don't respond to the RFI, then the town can indeed do general obligation bonds. The assumption will be that they do not provide 25.3, and you can do general obligation bonds for the entire area. That's unserved, including where it's cable. They won't want that because that means there'll be a carrier that comes in and overbuilds them with probably fiber to the home network. And so maybe that will incent them to respond appropriately to this bill. To be, in the long run, you really do want to know who's served and who's not served, because that's going to affect the take rate, who's going to take services in that town. So you do want them to actually respond, if we can possibly get them to do that. There's a penalty on their part if they don't respond, but we want to encourage them to respond, so we really know who's served and unserved. The second piece of this is the E911 locations are one of the few databases in the state that include the Latin long GIS location for every premise. And that's the information we'd like from E911. We don't want to know who lives there, how long they've lived there, none of that information. We want to know, is it a premise, is it a home, is it a commercial entity? You can get that from E911. Is it a trailhead or a cemetery or a building lot? Because those are also included in E911 sometimes. And so we're just trying to get an idea of what are the number of premises in that potential fiber to the premise area, and what is their Latin long, so you can plot it on a map and you can see clusters of unserved and served areas by understanding first what you got from the carriers and now the exact Latin long of the premises. And that's the only thing we're looking for in the E911 addressing. In New Hampshire, it's funny how this works, but in New Hampshire, it's like some big secret. Your E911 information is secret. In Vermont, you can get the E911 listing addresses, no personal information, right off their website under their, they have a GIS type of mapping locations on their website, and you can just pull that data down. It's right there. You need it, it's there. So why is it so secret here, and it's not so secret in Vermont? I have no idea. But it is great data if we can get it, and that's what that's for.
Great.
And I think the third one is just the same, fixes the same problem, right?
So the third bill, 559, it addresses the 60-day timeline to respond. So as I see it, it's adding that same penalty or that same control. 559 also talks about transmission rates, and as my interpretation of this was that basically advertised rates and your actual rates are different, and this bill talks about being served and unserved as being tied to those actual rates.
So that gives you an opportunity to challenge what the carriers tell you, right? So they tell you you have 95% of your town is covered by DSL, and they can get 25.2, 25.3, and you can challenge that, by looking at what speed test results tell you. As it turns out, I think most of what CCI has provided has been fairly accurate, from the experience I've seen from most of these towns. Is it accurate all the time? At my house, I can tell you that after 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I don't get what I'm supposed to get, and for whatever reason on Sunday mornings, I have no idea what goes on Sunday mornings, but my speed drops dramatically. But in general, I can get what I pay for. And that's what they tell me I can get on the response to the R5.
There's also some language about technologies and what qualifies as broadband, and this would, if you look on page 2 towards the bottom, it specifically excludes satellite from wireless services. So there's some new information about technologies added. Are there other interpretations, Brad, or questions?
Well, the one thing I see missing in all this is the fact that many providers have caps on the provisions and they start throttling down. And I was proposing a change to the definition of what broadband meant, not just 25.3, but 25.3 for the entire period of service. Some providers will give you 25.3 for 100 gigabytes, and then you're off. And then that means after 1 week you no longer have broadband by definition. And so I think the fact that the wording is very vague here, we need to include either a reasonable cap or the fact that if there is a cap or throttling or whatever they want to call it, there's lots of different ways, priority changes, throttling, caps, whatever, that it can't be considered broadband. In fact, I have provided some wording on that, and I was surprised that I hadn't seen it turn up here. But just to change the definition of broadband, it's just not 25.3, it's 25.3 for the entire period of service or up to a certain extent.
Any questions? Dana?
Is the information that's used to determine what the town has for provided service only dependent on the RFI, or is information that's gleaned from a town-wide survey requesting how people use their broadband or internet, most of them in our town don't have broadband, or why they use it, what they use it for, and more importantly, what is their speed?
Mm-hmm.
If they respond, is that information used or useful?
Yeah, I'll take a try at this. So it's always hard to read through the RSAs, but these amendments are focused on the bonding legislation specifically. So they're only related to that, process of raising funds. And to do that, you have to do the RFI. I think that excludes reaching out and collecting data through surveys. But maybe someone could correct me or add to that. Is that accurate?
They're going to use the carriers' numbers.
Yeah, for the bonding legislation, it says go to the carriers. So, does that answer your question, Dana?
Yeah, and if they don't respond, then it's assumed that you don't have this.
Right.
I'd like to point out one thing is when I started this process in 2016, carriers don't always know what they can provide. I found many errors and things that were reported to me by the carrier. So it's what they think is best from their best knowledge. It may not be guaranteed to be accurate, but it's their best guess. That's the best you can get. But I know many cases where their carriers provided a total error, questioned it, and they sent it back to the engineering group, and a month later said, oh yes, you're right. And so accuracy is a relative term here. It's just the best they know.
For what it's worth, following what Brad said, in our town, everyone who was sophisticated enough to both know what their purported service was and to know how to do a test of it said that they weren't getting, consistently were not getting the amounts described. Now that's a skewed group, I recognize, but it's pretty persuasive that what you see, however accurate it is, at some level, underrepresents the service, overrepresents the service.
Rod, did you have something?
Only for people who are thinking about bonding, one of the best first steps is to get in touch with a bond attorney. Brad and actually Walpole are using Divine Element, and they will supply you with a 12 or 13-step outline of exactly what you need to do. And that outline needs to be followed exactly.
And when.
Yeah, and when, because there are deadlines in there that if you miss them, then things don't go well. So find yourself someone to work with on as soon as you're thinking about making this step.
So just, is the information that we got the last time on the webinar that you did, you have the bond bank attorneys there, is what you're describing significantly different than that?
Yes.
It is.
The bond bank lawyers just talking about what's happening with the bond bank. There's a whole process of the RSAs, the RFI has to go out, the RFPs has to go out, town meetings have to go out, special meetings have to happen. All these have a time frame associated with them. If you miss any of those, you're screwed.
And they have to be noticed, and you have to have minutes, and they have to be submitted prior to the bond being funded.
We missed one deadline by one day and had a whole special town meeting to overcome that.
Right. Thank you.
One more question? Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can't use a survey to challenge the RFI, what do you use to challenge it with? I don't see that anywhere.
I don't have an answer for that one.
I think that you're gonna find that when you get your results back from the RFIs, that, remember, the threshold is 25.3, so you really don't care at that moment in time, that I'm supposed to get 10-1 and I only get 7.
Okay.
Or 6 or 5 or 3 or whatever, because I don't get 25. So I'm already below the threshold of 25.3. And the incumbent carrier, when they responded to these RFIs, prior to the formal request of an RFI, would often count those people who get 25.2. See, DSL can't do 25.3. So they used to count 25, they'd say 25, you know. Oh, this population can get 25. Well, there's a lot of difference between those who can get 25.2 and those that can't get 25.3. As a matter of fact, it moved Dublin from about 53% unserved to 83% unserved.
Wow.
Okay, but they were honest about it. When it came time to actually deliver a document in response to an RFI, it was as correct as they knew it to be. And we're 83% unserved. So once you get to, that's why it's important, I think, to get a response to the RFI and not just verbally talk to them. And so at some point, there's not too many people who are going to have more than that are going to say, I say I can get 30, but I really only get 25, or something along those lines. You know, there's very few that will fall into that category.
So these were 3 bills this session that are definitely relevant to all of our work. And there is an opportunity for the Monadnock Broadband Group to consider, joint testimony or coordinating. At a minimum, we're happy to share out those dates, when they're scheduled. But that's the other reason these points are on here.
And hopefully they'll schedule them all on the same time.
Not at the same time. On the same day, but not at the same time.
Consecutive. Oh, well, they're all on the same committee.
Okay.
So we're okay with that.
That's a good point. Okay, are there bills we missed? Is this New Hampshire bills? Bobby.
Speak for a short time. Hi, everyone from the office of Senator Hassan's office. I just wanted to take a few minutes. First off, pass out this document. This document has 4 bills that the senator has recently introduced or helped introduce into. So you'll see there's 4 bills that we've recently introduced. Some of these are directly inspired by some of the work that's been happening here in this region. I know that just before the holiday season in the fall, we had a couple of our legislative staffers come up to the state and we run around the state talking about some different issues. One of the big things that I wanted to make sure that we did was come and talk in this region with some of the stakeholders on broadband issues, and so we did get them connected with people like Carole Monroe. So these bills were directly a result of some of those conversations. The first one is the Rural Broadband Investment Tax Credit Act. This one's pretty simple. It just offers a federal tax credit for anybody that wants to use rural broadband development. Some of the particulars about that financing, kind of like Brad is always saying, you gotta look at the numbers. This is one of those bills where you need to look at the numbers to see if it's gonna work for you inside your funding model. And you'll notice on the bottom, it has not yet passed the Senate. It's also only been referred to committee, so we're a long way out from this being utilized, even if it does pass. But just wanted to make sure that was on your radar. The second one, the Rural Broadband Financing Flexibility Act, this one is basically a federal copy of the bill that enabled the Chesterfield model. That bill that allows for municipal bonding, basically taking that at the federal level with those same goodies and offering some federal incentives as well as some funds. That one has been, we've co-sponsored that with Senator Capito, and it's been read twice and referred to the Committee on Finance. The Rural Reasonable and Comparable Wireless Acts, the federal government basically has different definitions of what is quality broadband for people living in urban areas versus people living in rural areas. So that 25.3 that you guys are talking about is great, but not the whole country is even talking about that. We don't think that's very fair, so we want to make sure that that's an equal playing field. So we've introduced a bill to address that. And then the fourth one is the Data Act, the Broadband Deployment Accuracy and Technological Availability Act. Some of you guys have been part of the FCC mapping process that was going to look at the LTE services in this community. This basically requires the FCC to update those maps every couple of years, be more accurate on those reporting, offer chances for municipalities and regions to challenge that data, and a whole bunch of different aspects to that. But that one has quite a few co-sponsors on it too. So the other bills that I've kind of referenced is, it's us and quite honestly Senator Capito's office that have been doing a lot of the poll work behind that. But the fourth one, there's a group of about 20 senators really working on it. Yes.
So my question on that one, part of the problem with the FCC is they do it all by census blocks, and that coarseness basically screws up everything. So is there any push to change the resolution of their maps to get away from census blocks? Because currently the definition of covered people is if one person in that census block has adequate coverage, they assume the entire census block is covered, which is exactly the opposite of rural areas. And that's one of the big problems in the funding models of deciding coverage.
Yeah, so as far as reading the bill, when I read the bill, what that kind of says is that it's not addressed in the bill. It basically charges the FCC with having to do this and figuring it out. And so that, I imagine, is one of those issues that will be figured out in the markup sessions for Wednesday committee, but definitely something that we bring back to our staff, so thank you.
So we're a co-sponsor on the House companion bill by the same title, HR 4229. So on the House bill, I don't know if it's the same in the Senate, but they charge the FCC to establish what's called the Broadband Serviceable Location Fabric, which is a data set of geocoded information for all broadband service locations, atop which broadband maps are overlaid. So this is a vehicle to provide more granular data than would be available in the census tract data. So I don't know, and this bill will pass the House in December, so I don't know if that language had been changed in the Senate or not, but at least the House bill is addressing that issue of granular data to actually be useful.
Kind of like it's getting at, though, this is the one that definitely has the most activity around it.
Well, and I hope the process for challenging is going to be much easier. That is, we don't have to have our PUC driving around with five phones hanging out the windows and walking trails. I mean, it was pretty ridiculous.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to ask you. In the latest version of the ag grants, is the definition now 25.3? Not 10.1?
I wouldn't be able to say right now, but let me get back to you.
I thought I saw a note somewhere that it said it had gone up to 25.3.
The current reconnects,
Oh, USDA.
USDA.
yeah, and the current USDA reconnect threshold is 10.1 for the application that's opened last week.
Okay.
But it is my understanding that RUS might be different. So the USDA reconnects might be one thing, and RUS laws might be another.
Well, obviously it needs to be 25.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you, Bobby. And Tom, did you
Yeah,
have
I have a
anything
couple
else you wanted to
more,
add?
House bills, nothing as exciting as tax credits, but if you're all interested, I'm quite jazzed, so thanks for the opportunity to join you. So we have one mapping bill that sort of addresses the challenge to some degree. This is HR 4227, the Mapping Accuracy Promotes Services, or MAPS Act. And this makes it unlawful to willfully, knowingly, or recklessly submit inaccurate broadband coverage information or data to the FCC. So this makes it, federally, criminally illegal to do so. So we're hoping this will incent, the providers to submit accurate data. And we're hopeful that with the combination of these bills that we're proposing, that the maps will become both more granular and more accurate in their original submission to the FCC. So that also passed on December 16th. And HR 4500, which passed January 8th. This is the Promoting U.S. Wireless Leadership Act. This bill requires the Department of Commerce to assist trusted companies, i.e. companies determined to pose no national security threat, not Huawei, and relevant stakeholders with participation in organizations that set standards for telecoms, wireless devices, and related equipment. So this is something that we're hoping is going to be able to promote fixed wireless equipment as well as mobile wireless data as well. So, does anyone have any questions?
Hey, comment on that, because
Sure.
one of the issues I was making about the data caps and stuff,
Yeah.
and meeting the spec. So a lot of the satellite and the wireless type approaches are going to have data caps in there somewhere, so that has to be addressed somehow.
Okay.
But those technologies are going to have a bottleneck in there, so that comes to the problem again. What is broadband?
So that goes for sort of the new 5G equipment. Your major concern is that there's going to be data caps.
I guarantee there'll be data caps.
Okay. Sure. Okay, well, that's certainly something that I can take back to our legislative team in DC and see if that's something that's being talked about in the Energy and Commerce Committee, whether or not we can amend that 25.3 definition to also include data caps as well, because that's an important point.
I'll make one comment also on 5G. A lot of people keep thinking 5G is a solution for rural areas. It's not.
Yeah.
In order to put 5G in rural areas, you have to run fiber down all the roads anyway.
Yeah.
And so why would you put a 5G terminal there rather than just putting fiber right to your house? So don't get caught in saying 5G will solve rural area problems.
Yeah. Sure. Absolutely. Did you have a question?
Are there any teeth in the broadband mapping data? I mean, is there a penalty for providing that?
So, I mean, we have yet to receive guidance from DOJ on that, but the language in this bill, if it were to be signed into law, certainly would carry some sort of penalty. I don't know if that would be, it's a little premature to. Yeah, well, we can, public comment period. We'll put it in the suggestion box. Yeah, not at this point. And I also had, leads me to my next point. I have not received any update of the FCC investigation that's underway. I don't know if any of the Senate offices have at all. Yeah, so, but we'll keep everyone posted if we hear back on that front. So, thanks.
Thank you. Any other legislative updates while we're covering them so thoroughly?
I just want to,
Yeah.
an email went out probably right as this was starting, so you may not have seen it yet, but we're all working with Carole Monroe with the state to convene the initiatives around the state on Monday from 10 to 12. And we have USDA Reconnect guys that are going to be there and looking at creative ways to pioneer CRA funding for digital equity. So we're going to pull in some bankers also. So we'd love anyone to participate as well. And that's going to be at the Department of Business and Economic Affairs in Concord.
And this is next Monday, you said?
Monday, 10 to 12. Yeah, they have the USDA also has a couple conferences coming up. I think one's in DC, we're going to be in DC, not announced yet. Another one's in Atlanta, and that's also where they're going to have USDA grant funding workshops and that type of program at a national level. So we wanted to get our event in before they take our state team away. To other national things. I know, it is frustrating.
The meeting will be at Department of Business and Economic Affairs, 100 North Main Street, normally 1 Eagle Square in Concord. And updates will be given on the USDA Reconnect Fund, the FCC Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, and the CRA for broadband. That gives a host of characters who will be joining the meeting.
It'll be a really good discussion.
So I would just like to make, I'm not sure I can attend here now, but one of the big problems I saw with all the grants and USDA funding, anything from the federal government, there was an ownership requirement in there of the assets. And the requirement was that the town or whoever had to own that asset forever. And a lot of providers are not interested in that. And so that's like that's a stop right there. So that is something that needs to be discussed, is ownership with these grants, because if the town, because I know our town, we did not want to own the asset. One is we owned it forever. Questions of liability, stuff on screen. But also the issue winds up being we're not going to get taxes for it because we'd rather have them own it because then they pay us taxes. We don't get taxes for it. So the issue of, and some providers do not want to use an asset unless they own it or have ownership. I know CCI is changing that model a little bit now, trying to get around the taxable, non-taxable stuff. But that is a big issue in all those federal grants. All the federal money, USD and everything, it all says the town has to own it forever.
It is still, and this next round of Reconnect is admittedly still very stringent and has a lot of limitations. They did do more to add flexibility. They are required to do a third round before the end of this calendar year is over. So this is also a great opportunity to discuss ways that they have the liberty to change these guidelines, these agencies do, widen it to make it so ownership of assets is not required in the third round. So I think it's very important for them to hear this feedback from us as well as every other opportunity. So if we can keep hitting them with that information, it'd be good. But if you can make it, we want to be there for everyone.
Thanks for mentioning that timely event. We'll send that out to others who aren't here since it's coming right up. Let's move on in our agenda. We have two guests today for presentations, and the topic was collaborative models. You might remember we did a short exercise following the last meeting, trying to prioritize what people were most interested in, and what we found is there's some overlap in the funding and building approaches that ValleyNet and others have taken outside of our region, obviously, and maybe what could be seen in New Hampshire as far as having access to communication districts. So pleased to have Carole Monroe here today as a first presenter to kind of touch on ValleyNet and ECFiber. I know Carole's obviously attended as a regular to these meetings. And also Stephen Campbell of LymeFiber. He'll be presenting after Carole. He's a retired Dartmouth College IT engineer and has lived in Lyme since 2001. So we'll learn a little bit about what's going on on our side of the river. Here you go, Carole.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Let me stand back here. No, it's not. So we've talked a little bit over these many meetings about what East Central Vermont Telecom District, or better known as ECFiber, is. But I'm going to start this time with ValleyNet, because ValleyNet is a not-for-profit and it has an unusual mission. So it's, and that's the mission that's up there. It says, enhances the lives of those it serves by advocating for universal, and that's a key bullet here, and effective internet access and providing services to facilitate internet access and increase citizen community engagement. It's a not-for-profit in the state of Vermont, and it is an upper valley. Its region is the upper valley of New Hampshire and Vermont, and it's located in Royalton. It provides all the design, engineering, construction management, and ISP operations for the ECFiber district and also for LymeFiber, which you'll be hearing about as well.
Monadnock going? Let's see. Nope. Let's try it for the keyboard. Okay.
Might be able to deliver broadband, but I'm not sure I can work it.
Not sure you can deliver this presentation. We're going to make it happen.
Okay.
Not sure.
Yeah, what's up
I
there?
don't know. Need to jump start it. The remote's working now.
Okay. So ValleyNet's history is that from 1994 until 2006, it was a local dial-up ISP started by Dartmouth College and Montshire Museum in the Upper Valley, and delivered those types of services to 6,000 homes, as well as a number of users, and also did a number of other things like electronic recycling and web hosting and computer education and so on during that time period. And then in 2006, it sold that dial-up portion of the business, so it sold those accounts to SovereignNet, and used part of that money was used as a startup for ECFiber. So about $300,000 came out of that. And so from 2007 to the present, it's really developed a rural universal fiber to the home model with ECFiber in Vermont. There's over 1,000 miles of network already in place, over 4,200 customers. It's raised $42 million on the revenue bond market, municipal revenue bond market. Each one of those bond offerings, by the way, is sold out within 2 to 3 days. Never had a problem selling them out. The interest rates on those bonds range in between 4 and 5%. Sometimes I think there's some a little bit lower. The most recent offering is out 28 years. So the offering actually has bonds from like 5 years to 28 years, but that's the longest time period. It's been a really successful way of raising the capital needed to build out broadband. And just for the record, ECFiber has been EBITDA and cash flow positive since about 2014. 2015, it knew it needed 3 years of audited financials in order to go to the revenue bond market, as well as to be cash flow and EBITDA positive, and it got to that point, and that's when it started to use the revenue bond market instead of private investment. And then in 2018, we established a relationship with LymeFiber, and we're working on that project, and there's more on that to come. And we have lots more to do, but we're very close to finishing the 1,400 miles of unserved territory in the ECFiber district. And ECFiber is looking at their adjacent towns to determine if they want to include additional towns in their district. particularly the one-offs, and specifically some towns in which there's partial areas that adjoin, that are contiguous to the ECFiber district that are unserved, whereas the rest of the town might have a cable option. Those rural areas are unserved, so they're working on that now. At this moment in time, though, we're also the recipients of a Rural Community Development Initiative grant. We partner with the Center for Rural Innovation in Heartland, Vermont, and CTG Energy and Technology in Maryland on this grant, and it's really to provide feasibility planning and development of rural broadband models. It's partnered with 6 entities: the North Country Council, Upper Valley Lake Sunapee Regional Planning, Roxbury, Vermont, Reedsboro, Vermont, Garrett County, Maryland, and Pine Bluffs, Arkansas. And so some of those you can see come from the fact that 2 of the entities come from Vermont and New Hampshire, and the other one comes from Maryland, and that's where we're focusing our attention. We anticipate that we'll have like 6 different models, and that's good to have these, various models that rural areas can look at and decide how that fits into what they're planning to do. We also are the recipients of a Vermont Broadband Innovation Grant with Wyndham Regional Planning Commission in Vermont, and that is specifically to do feasibility and business planning for that area. Vermont advocates for communication union districts. It likes the ECFiber model. It can see that it's working, and it's been, and we're serving some of the most rural areas in Vermont with fiber to the home. And so they are advocating for towns to look at a district model, and they're providing these grants in areas in which they're willing to do that. So these are $60,000 grants in Vermont. I'm working with Carole County Broadband, and we're actually using the grant funding for the that's under the North Country Council to do the feasibility and planning for Carole County. And Carole County is looking to have this district model approved. They've been pretty adamant about keeping the county together because Hale's location and Hart's location and others very similar to that probably wouldn't be served without it. And they're well aware of that. Even though Conway and Wolfboro and those towns would be, have all the service they want, and there are lots of carriers who are interested in them, these other very rural entities have the same issues that we all have here in this region. So what is ECFiber? Well, it's a communication union district. It's got 23 active towns. The 24th is Montpelier. Montpelier belongs to another communication union district as well, so that's partly why that is. And right now they're looking to see if there are others that want to join the district now that they know that they're getting very close to completing the unserved areas in their area. It's considered a municipality, follows all the rules of a municipality, warns its meetings. Governing board has appointed delegates from each town, sometimes alternates. And so people sometimes ask me about how big can a district be. Well, I think you need to look at how big can a governing board be and be reactive, right? So there are 23 towns in this district. It seems to do well. I'm not sure what it would do with 50, but that's one of the things to consider. It owns the asset. So all the fiber to the home, all the equipment, all the hub equipment is all owned by the district. The district has 0 employees. It contracts with ValleyNet to do all of its capital planning, fund development, as well as operations and construction management. And actually, the revenue bond market likes that. They like the fact that it doesn't have any employees. They're a little bit scared of, I think they said pension plans or something along those lines from municipalities, and so they're happy that there are no employees in the district and that it's contracted out. Not unlike a sewer district, by the way, or a water district. That very much it holds true in those areas as well. No impact on the town's credit rating, no recourse to the town, no general obligation bonds in Vermont, by the way, no risk to the taxpayers, and so these districts keep moving along. Vermont law actually prohibits municipal funding of telecommunications. But ValleyNet manages all the facets of the operations for ECFiber. And there's about 24 plus employees at ValleyNet. That keeps growing. When I became the CEO there, I had 9 in 2015. So we're contributing to the growth of opportunities in the state of Vermont at this time. We'd like to do the same here as well. And the district, though, sets all the policy and the general guidelines. They have set the policy that we build in the unserved areas first. We build where there's the greatest demand in those areas first, that we're net neutral, and we maintain data privacy, and there are no employees at the district level. And we sit really that's actually the center of Vermont. It's the little map down there. And you can see there are some towns that are not exactly contiguous. Matter of fact, we built out West Windsor, which is right here, before we built out the 2, Woodstock and Reading. Now you can do that in a fiber network because we connected it back to our main network with backhaul fiber or dark fiber, and it's worked out just fine. It had a redundant loop, and they were active long before the other 2. It's been an interesting process. Different business model for some of this district. So you'll notice Hartford is in here. Hartford is Quechee, and if you're familiar with Vermont, that's a very populated area. I think there's more condos in Quechee than there are in most other, probably all of New Hampshire. I'm not sure which, but there are a lot of condos in Quechee, and it's fully covered by Comcast. Well, fully covered with a small area that we're building this year, but beyond that, like 95% of it is fully covered with Comcast. So a different business model. That's not part of the unserved areas in that 1,400 miles. But we do have a different business model that we will build in those areas if there are enough people who are interested in taking service. On the other hand, it's true that regional density averaging allows for universal coverage, and that the denser towns, more densely populated towns, do subsidize those that are not. Granville, Vermont, at the base of the Green Mountains, is fully covered, fiber to the premise, every premise, even that premise a mile up that dirt road, every single premise that's on grid, and I'll explain that in a minute, has a population less than 300. So every one of those houses has an opportunity to have a fiber to the home connection. And I say off-grid, we do cover some customers off-grid. ECFiber does have a few fiber to the yurt in its footprint, but we do them one-off because you never know what it takes to get to that house that's off-grid. You may need 6 easements from 6 different property owners to even get to that premise. So we do take them one-off, and we do that fairly routinely, but we don't include them as something we're just naturally going to serve. Sometimes we just can't. So this is the financing process for ECFiber. Very beginning, it's all private funding, investment opportunities. So we talked a little bit about how ValleyNet contributed their share, and there were 2 other major investors to build out the first pilot project of 20 miles. It was so successful, everybody wanted service in that 20 miles, and then everybody who was near it wanted service too, and they said, well, how can we do this? And we know that it costs us $30,000 a mile, so we basically said, if you can raise in investment enough to build your road, we'll come and build it. And that's the way it started. And so it looked like a bit of a spider web. You know, we had a little bit here in this town, a little bit here in this town, a little bit over here, and it was all connected together back to the main source. But it's not necessarily the way to do this going forward. But we had 450 investors in $2,500 increments investing in this network to raise $7 million for that first, before we got to that revenue bonding stage. And many at $2,500, many at $30,000 or $100,000. They've all been paid back in the first 2 issues of the revenue bonds. Some were not happy about that because they were getting 5, 6, 6.5% interest, and they couldn't get that in the market anywhere else. But they did get paid back right away. That's how they got started. In Vermont at this time, Vermont has set up a fund through Vermont Economic Development Authority for $4 million grants to these new communication union districts to get themselves started. That's startup money. And they are loans, they have to be paid back, but long-term financing and a slow payback period in the beginning. But that's how they want these communication union districts to build and get to the point of being able to also go to the revenue bond market for their capital build dollars. And you can see that the last sections are where we've borrowed from the municipal capital markets. And this is the net result, though. So early growth, the revenue is the green, EBITDA is the black, customers are the yellow, network miles are the blue, and it's just continually gone up and spiked, and it continues to rise. About half of the new customers every year come from areas that we have built previously, not from new build. So some ECFiber by the numbers. Generally speaking, passings per mile in the area are about 14. Our CapEx, that's how much it costs us to build a mile, is about $30,000. CapEx per customer, $6,000. Cost per passing, $2,200. Customers per mile, 4 to 5. We'd like to see 6. We're edging up to that. Our take rate has been about 35% after the first year of service, and then it continues to climb. We have some towns at about 50 to 55% take rate. Average revenue per customer, $105 a month. And then the EBITDA margin here, cost of capital that we've, mostly the revenue bonds, 4.5 to 5.5%. And the terms for those bonds are 23 to 28 years. 3 years of that are interest only. It shouldn't be this hard. Should this be this hard? So that $2,200 per passing is very much what the incumbent carriers tell you it will cost for them to build up. So why isn't there a business model for them to do that? Why are these rural areas supposed to be so hard? The infrastructure does pay for itself over time, and we know that it raises our property values by at least the $2,200, and the newest surveys across the country have shown it's more like $5,000. But really the question is, can you sell your house at all if it doesn't have broadband? Is it really worth anything, or is it going to take you a whole lot longer to sell it without it?
Excuse me, when you show this to the companies, the carriers, and you ask them, well, look at the numbers here, why don't you do it?
Because I think the biggest difference is that we're a not-for-profit. We don't have shareholders to report to. We don't have a required return on our investment, ROI. But with all that in mind, then the least they can do is not stand in our way. So some of the barriers that we run into. Here in New Hampshire, the communication districts, that's new language. We would like to be able to have a district language. You can join together as towns today under RSA 52A, B. It's a more of an interlocal contract type of arrangement, but the problem with that is the markets don't know what that is. The revenue bond markets don't understand that language. They understand water districts and sewer districts, and they'll understand communication districts, but they really don't understand that language. The incumbent carriers don't want competition, so they make it difficult to the best that they can to gain access to the utility poles. Make-ready work is still a problem. New Hampshire is not a state that uses the FCC make-ready requirements, and therefore we don't yet have one-touch make-ready on our poles, which would reduce the costs considerably. It's a direction I think we need to head in, but not this year, but maybe next year. Pole attachment agreements require a surety bond, $300,000, $400,000 surety bonds. and/or letters of credit. If you're a new startup entity, that's near to impossible to get unless you have some individual who's willing to put their money on the line, because that's very difficult. And the insurance liability that's required in the pole attachment agreements is higher than most towns have today for insurance.
So, Carole, in the case of ECFiber, when you mentioned that it was a requirement, I thought, for infrastructure ownership, that excludes poles, right?
They don't own the poles, but they own all the assets on the poles. And they are the entity that has a pole attachment agreement that is getting pole attachment licensing from the utilities in the state of Vermont. So Green Mountain Power and CCI and others. And all those licenses are under the name of ECFiber. And startup capital in New Hampshire is very challenging. We are dependent upon RUS and USDA funding if we can possibly get it. The mapping has been very difficult for us because by the census block, sometimes there's one entity in a census block that has fiber to the premise, and that just blows it for everybody else in that census block. And then the 25.3, that number needs to go to 25.3. The federal government did pay CCI to deliver 10.1 in most areas that were unserved in New Hampshire previously. So there aren't a lot of areas that don't get 10.1 today, but there is, as you can see in Dublin, there is a lot of areas, 83%, that don't get 25.3. And so for that reason, we need to try and move that up to the federal definition under 25.3.
So is there any state level New Hampshire funding for rural broadband?
No. Not that I'm aware of. It's a big secret if there is. I mean, New Hampshire has so many challenges right now, and it is not legislation that we've been able to get passed in any way, shape, or manner. Because they say, okay, do you want to solve the opioid crisis, or do you want broadband? So.
You said that your take-up rate was about 35%, you're hoping for 50. What are the alternatives? Are there good competitive options that people have? They're just not interested, or what?
No, we start at 35%, and
Right.
it goes up from there. So once it's up and running for 2 years, it's up to 40, and when it's up to 3 years, they're up to 55 or 60%. So it gradually has been increasing to that level. We're a little more expensive than your DSL that has had a special deal attached to it. So my 1999 DSL. And there must be there are some people who don't need to have fiber. All they do is answer their email and browse the internet, and they don't really need it, and so they're happy with what they have. And so there's room for both. In the ECFiber world, they're also looking, as they get to this area of being, at some point, not too far into the distant future, their revenues are going to exceed their debt obligations and their operations. And they're going to have to decide what to do. And one of them is to reduce pricing or to offer special pricing to those families with children on school lunch programs, or seniors that already get, that are at a certain income level that might already get a tax break on their property taxes. So there are other types of things that make sense, and that's what they're thinking about now.
So what about the arrangement between ECFiber and ValleyNet? Is that a permanent thing, or can ECFiber decide to get another provider, or how's that all work?
They could. We do have a contract with them. It is a 5-year contract, renewable every 5 years. I don't anticipate that to change. There's not a lot of providers like us out there, and that's one of the issues I think that we're going to find here in New Hampshire, although it is changing, and so I think that there's opportunities for that. They're happy with the work that we do. We've been so tightly together for so long. It would really take a lot, I think, to have that change, but it's altogether possible. Hopefully not in the near term. So we talked about the funding in New Hampshire being difficult, and then what's going on today, which is what I call cherry picking. So you have, carriers, sometimes they're wireless carriers, sometimes they're CCI, like picking towns here and here and here and so on, but not covering an entire area. And I think that's going to be a problem for the smallest of towns, which is why I advocate for the districts. And then we talked about the possibilities for ValleyNet. Just that we're working with North Country Council, we're expanding over the border into Lyme, and there's more expansion over the border in that area. We're working with the Upper Valley Regional Planning. We're working with Jean and the legislators here to get some of the language changed, although I want to check on the changes that you mentioned about data caps. I think that we might be able to squeeze that in as an amendment. And that we're working with the PUC on one-touch make-ready and changes to the make-ready rules for next year. And so those are the questions. You have questions for me. I can tell you it's been a pleasure to work with LymeFiber, who will come up and speak next, and we hope to work with more towns across the border. Any other questions?
Hey, I'm going to get Stephen's slides up, but if you think of another question for Carole, can do that while I bring up the presentation.
Excuse me, is there a sound system in the room? Because there's some machinery.
Yeah.
Maybe we can turn that on.
Let's turn that on.
Yeah, Rod, what? You could do that while I get the slides up. That'd be great.
The ECFiber facts, I'll call them.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
All right, great.
And this is my remote.
This one right here. Back and forward, and then there's a pointer too.
Thanks a lot. Yep.
Thank you.
Don't leave.
I'm not going anywhere.
Thank you all. I'm Steve Campbell from Lyme, New Hampshire. And as my intro said, I'm a retired network geek engineer. I worked at Dartmouth College for years, so. But I've been involved in the long, drawn-out process of getting broadband to Lyme. I'm going to give you a very quick overview. If you have questions, some I may be able to answer, some Carole can answer, and if there are others that can't be answered, I'll write them down and try to get back to you. This is right off our homepage. When we put the homepage up, put the website up for the first time, these are the things we wanted to emphasize. Just a little bit about Lyme. That green is Grafton County, and the red within it is Lyme. The towns just south of us are Hanover and Lebanon. North of us is Orford. The population of the town is about 1,700. These numbers are ballpark, but the latest you can get from Wikipedia. I believe there are approximately 600 premises in the town. We have a select board. We do not have a town manager. And the annual budget for the town is about $2.5 million. It gives you a sense of kind of the economic size of the town. We have some working farms in the town. We have a lot of timber. A good deal of the town is actually national forest. We have some retail, hardware store, a couple of inns, that sort of thing, and the usual services, insurance office, bank branches, and that sort of thing. Nothing very big, no chains. I don't think there's any chain of any kind in town, and no industry that you would call a large industrial facility. So it's kind of your typical small New Hampshire town.
The ILEC is consolidated. It offers DSL, regular and bonded, pretty much throughout the town. I'm one of the lucky people. I'm about a mile from the CO, and I have bonded DSL, and I could get 18, 19 on a good day. So, you know, that's doing really well. There's fiber offered to a few businesses in town, but basically nobody's offering residential fiber at this point. The cable is negligible. There's one little community, little cluster of buildings in the very southern part of the town right next to Hanover, which has Comcast. Comcast serves Hanover, and they saw this cluster right over the border and offered to serve it. This is some years ago, but declined to even extend their service up into the center of the village. So, but other than that, there's no cable in the town at all. You could always put up a satellite if you're really desperate. And there's some fixed wireless services. Wavecom is one. And there are people in town who find that service quite useful, but it doesn't get up into the hills and through the woods and the tree leaves and all that sort of thing. The demographics of the town, we have a little of everything. There are a certain number of bedrooms. To some extent, it's a bedroom community for Dartmouth College and Mary Hitchcock, Dartmouth Medical Center. I'm an example of that. I worked at the college. But it has everything, the whole scale of socioeconomic, I would say. It's generally a fairly affluent town, but it does have a mix. This is what I really came to talk about, which is sort of our timeline. It's kind of a history of broadband in New Hampshire, almost. We started back in the aughts with West Central New Hampshire, a group that was really begun by some town managers, Julia Griffin in Hanover and Steve Schneider in Enfield and some others, just trying to say, what can we do to get broadband out? Those were the days when pretty much all you had was dial-up. In 2010, along came the economic crisis and the redevelopment, American Rehabilitation and Recovery Act, I believe it was, that provided some funding, and that gave us the Fast Roads project, which you're probably familiar with. It was a middle mile fiber backbone running from Ringe through the Upper Valley and up to Orford. Right, Carole was a major player in that project. It provided service to community anchor institutions, CAIs, you know, the town office, the fire department, the schools, and the library in all those towns. And in two of the towns, maybe this is ancient history for most of you, in Enfield and Ringe, there were funds for a complete town build-out. But otherwise, it served only these community anchor institutions. But it was the first time we had fiber for those folks in town. So we looked at that, we being a group of people in town, half a dozen of us, mostly retired, I got to be honest, who have been trying to push this process along for years. And we said, well, geez, we've got this fiber backbone now. The school and the library are getting nice service. Why can't, and the hub is in the town office, in the closet, you know, the rack of equipment. Why can't we build on that literally and build out fiber to the rest of the town? And so we commissioned a report, a study of the town by an outfit called Design 9, to see what it would take to actually build fiber through the town, assuming we use this hub of the Fast Roads network as its primary feed. The Design 9 folks came to town. They did a windshield survey. You know, they drove, I forgot to mention, we have about 60 miles of dirt roads in the town that the town maintains. They drove them all and surveyed poles and premises. They told us about different design options for the technology of the network and also for how much to cover. It would cost more if you wanted to cover 100%. If you did the more dense areas, obviously it would cost less. The philosophy of the committee has always been, let's shoot for 100%. You know, if we have to cut back, okay, but let's shoot for 100%. And that came in at roughly $2.5 million. So we had a plan. This report gave us a plan, gave us approximate price tag, so we could go out and try to get funding. Come 2017, we talked with the ValleyNet folks. We know these people, they're right across the river. ValleyNet has done work in New Hampshire as well. At one time, I was even on the board of ValleyNet. And they expressed some interest in extending the ECFiber model into New Hampshire. And we said, that's great, let's work on that. So we did. We got ourselves a little better organized. In 2018, we created an LLC so we could, you know, do the paperwork and all that sort of thing. And we decided after some discussion that it would be a for-profit, that LymeFiber would be a for-profit to better attract private funding. It would be a for-profit, but the funders, who turned out to all be town residents, were doing it also. They were going to get a return, but they were also doing it to do something good for the town. I know that sounds a little hokey, but it's really true. It meant that they were willing to take less of a return than they might get on Wall Street, say. And we were able to locate enough people in the town to put up that much funding. That was a big deal. We had a website up. We put up a sign-up form which invited people to sign up, no obligation, just tell us where you live and would you be interested in the service. That gave us a map of the town that showed where potential customers were, which allowed us to do the financial projections as well as the network design. And I think the number of sign-ups now is, is it 600? 400? 400. So it's a substantial percentage of the number of premises on town, which would be your 100%. So we had a deal with ValleyNet. The good thing was ValleyNet had the experience. They knew the area. They had all the bucket trucks and they knew the procedures and they had their pricing set and their website had details for how you put in conduit and all these other things, and we could just literally borrow those. So it really gave us a boost to get going. In 2019, we signed a contract with ValleyNet, and we really started work. We had site surveys, meaning you contracted, I believe, with somebody to go out and visit each of the premises where people had signed up and said, yes, I want service, to see what would actually be involved at that address to get the drop into them, whether it was a simple drop or it needed conduit or new conduit, all those details. That's been done. The actual network design has been completed. The make-ready is underway. It's wonderful to drive through the town and see new telephone poles here and there and actually see consolidated trucks out with guys measuring the height of cables, and we've occasionally stopped a CCI person without saying anything about what we were involved and say, what are you doing? And they'll say, oh, somebody's going to string new fiber up here, we're adjusting. So real progress. And late last year, the RFPs went out for the actual construction. And we're in the process, we've received a couple of responses to that. We're about to form a group to start looking at those RFPs. And the plan is this year, this spring, probably after mud season, when you can get onto these dirt roads, we'll actually begin construction and start connecting people. We've identified a hub in the town, so that makes the design possible. And with any luck, we'll have a fair number of people connected this calendar year and probably finish it off next year. That is our plan. So for us, I think these are the things I would consider essential for our success. We had these local champions. I don't know who came up with that term, but it's people in the town who've been pushing this issue for years. I'm sure many of you are like this. And it helped that we had varied skills in that group. We had some business people, we had some finance people, we had some techies, We had some local business owners. And we not only got to hear their different points of view, but we actually got to use their skills from time to time in making this work. We had local community-focused funding. We're really fortunate in that. There were enough people in the town with the resources willing to commit them to do the right thing for the town, get a return, but maybe a slightly more modest return. And in ValleyNet, we have a committed and experienced builder and operator. As I'm sure is true for most of you, there's no way the town wants to get into the business of running an ISP. So having ValleyNet and the ECFiber experience there has just been a tremendous benefit for us. We've been able to take, as I said earlier, a lot of the details of running a service like this, they've already worked out, and given a few minor modifications for it being a different state, we take those literally. We've been telling people in town who want to sign up, who want to know what's it going to cost, we say, well, go to the ECFiber website and you'll see the costs there, and we're going to be pretty much the same thing. So that's been a huge benefit for us. The usual websites, the top one is the town website if you really want to come to Lyme. LymeFiber's site, ECFiber's, and ValleyNet's is up there. And if you're interested in Design 9, they're still around. I checked the other day. It's design9.com. Design 9 spelled out as one word. They did a really good job. I think that's as much as I have. If there are questions, I'll try to answer. Oh, okay.
I have a question. Yeah, I know you're focused on giving coverage for Lyme right now.
We are.
Has there ever been consideration about, once that build out happens, I'm sure
Yes.
neighbors have kind of been looking over proverbial fence and
Exactly.
yeah.
We've been getting, I handle the incoming info at lymefiber.net email, and we've gotten a number of requests from people who say, I live just over the line on such and such a road, can I get service too? And we discussed it and with ValleyNet and among ourselves, and our group is a Lyme group. So as far as LymeFiber is concerned, we're not offering service outside of the town boundaries. ValleyNet, on the other hand, as Carole said, is interested in expanding their footprint in New Hampshire if they can do it. And there are certainly neighborhoods adjacent to us, if not whole towns, that would be interested in service. I think in the network design, when they get to the town line, they're sort of basically leaving an extra spool of fiber there, so they're ready if it happens later on that they can move. We couldn't deal with it because every town has different politics and organizations and things like that. We're in touch. We're keeping our neighbors informed. I should mention too that although this is a totally private operation, we're obviously keeping the select board up to date on what we're doing. We've briefed them a couple of times and they've been completely supportive. Why wouldn't they be? So yeah, people are interested. That's a future, and we're doing what we can now, or ValleyNet will be doing what they can now to be ready when that comes.
And the interesting thing about that is Hanover is one of those towns that has a real strong cable presence, but the areas surrounding that cable presence are unserved.
Right.
And so some of those are right up by the Lyme border, and so we're making sure that there's enough fiber to do that, and we've been in contact with the town manager, and we've discussed those possibilities about what it would take to just do those uncabled areas in Hanover.
We've actually, when people ask about that, we've encouraged them to go to our sign-up form and say, I'm in the next town, but I'd still like service. It's fine, there's no obligation, and it gives us a database for future work to indicate, again, how much demand there is outside. That may be of use to ValleyNet if they decide to expand. Other questions?
At the rate they're going, I think we're going to get close to 100% participation. It just keeps growing.
Well, the traffic on the town listserv about what crummy service I'm getting from Consolidated, is a standard. You all hear the same thing, I'm sure. So, yeah, we're pretty confident. Yes?
I just want to make a comment to all the people of the towns, because there's an RSA that says a town can't favor one provider over another. And so what you have to be very careful of is where the information flow. It can't come from the town government, it has to come from other individuals who are not affiliated with the town. Otherwise, there's legal issues there.
Do you know what the RSA is, what number?
I don't, it's a general article about a company, town promoting this specific businesses or things. So before you walk a very fine line where I can do whatever I want to, but I'm not a town employee.
Because you're not a town employee.
Yeah, so, so.
Or an elected official.
Yeah, well, I'm
Right.
an official, but not for broadband.
Okay.
But you have to be careful on that. There is a very fine line as far as what you can and can't do. You talk to town attorney about that.
Right.
But I would add, when I was talking about our local committee with varied skills, one of the people on the committee is a former selectman, which, you know, he's been interested in broadband forever, and he was a selectman for a while, now is off that. But that's a useful resource to have on your committee too, just to know some of these details and the local regs.
Apropos of that and Brad's comment in Harrisville, I'm a former selectman in Harrisville, and our broadband committee was set up by the planning board, but we disaffiliated from the planning board, became just an advisory body.
So we don't follow right to know.
For latter
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Steve.
Sure.
And we'll have this and the other slide decks available on our website later on today, maybe. So this kind of brings us to other updates, and just wanted to give a chance for those of you who haven't maybe already shared what your community or organization is doing to just share what you're up to. Many people are curious about what's going on with communities looking at bonding and many other things. So I'll just open it up to anyone to jump in with an update.
Well, could I ask who has a bonding warrant on their town agenda? So that's Walpole, Harrisville, and I think Westmoreland is included in that.
Westmoreland,
And certainly Dublin, and Ridge, I think. I don't have any others, but that's.
So that's
just an idea of what
five
it
that we
is.
know of. Any specific updates,
I'll just
Andrew?
note that as Carole or Sturdy has been doing in Dublin, we're talking to consolidate, and they, partly perhaps based on some things Brad said, are changing the methodology to make the infrastructure owned by the town wholly, not sort of for the length of the bond or anything like that. So they've, I'm sure for the reasons primarily that Brad referred to, the taxation ones, but it also has some benefits to the town.
They're hoping they can make it a non-taxable bond.
Well, I questioned them on that, and they're not requiring that. So we're proceeding on the assumption of a taxable bond.
Walpole's been working with Rob Coster on the contract issues. Now we're in our, I don't know, 8th iteration of the contract, I think, trying to get the right language in there. So I think between all of the towns and all of the input he's done, he has a clear goal. I don't know if he's going to get there, but I think he's got a clear goal now.
And they want a single template to the extent that.
That's exactly right, and it's, the goal was non-taxable because of the bond bank, so you don't get caught in 5% rule that our friend Brad did.
I should point out, we got a very good taxable bond at 2.14%.
He was saying too that the concern isn't so much for people who voted in this March, but then next year they foresee us maybe being too large for the pool of money that's available.
But the bond bank did say they were willing to offer a taxable bond this year.
Special one.
A special one.
The difference is, the county just, took a bond out for about $8 million, roughly $7.6, I think it was, or 7.7. We got it at 2.08 with a $100,000 premium to buy that down. So there is a little difference between non-taxable bond rates
just want to say that although we think, and that CCI does have, when they present their response, their proposals to the RFPs, they are going to be about $1 million different from anybody else who puts an offer on the table. And that's because they own the poles. So they're not charging for make-ready or applications or annual fees for pole access. And depending upon how many poles in your town, most of these small towns will be between $850 and $850,000 to 1.2 million in pole access. So you'll get responses from others on an RFP, but that difference is going to be there. I mean, there's just sort of no way. Any other carrier coming in is going to have to get access to the poles, and that's what it's going to cost. On the other hand, some of the other carriers coming in, particularly those looking at a district model, like GWI, are very interested in USDA and RUS funding, and they're very adept at getting that. So there are other options as we look at this than just the CCI option. And I think in many ways that's why CCI is being so aggressive, really assertive here, which is a totally new element in the last 18 months than what you would have heard before. But because there are other carriers who want to serve the rural areas of New Hampshire, they're very concerned about losing their footprint. And this is what they need to do to really hold on to it. And they probably needed to do it a while ago, but they're not very, they don't have a lot of capital as a company. So this is a way that of a public-private partnership that can work. And there will be other options out there as well, particularly if we can do some districts. I know there are other companies who would rather see a district approach. So we can get this done in New Hampshire. That's the good news, right?
The other issue about the pole ownership, the other companies may have to charge more because they get on the line, on the poles. But the make ready may delay a project 9 months to 12 months. There's a time delay, just because the company wants to get on there. The bureaucratic paperwork and stuff, because of all the regulations and the way it's set up, may add 9-12 months onto the process.
That's what advantage Walpole has, because every pole in town is owned by CCI. So our subscriber fee is, I think, the lowest one yet, because they own all the poles.
Any other updates from folks? I received one from email from Ryan Clark, who's a regional director at AT&T, and he sent a short note about their FirstNet build-out. This was a topic we covered quite some time ago, but that was covered during a Monadnock Broadband Group meeting, and he's out of their Nashua location. The short update from AT&T says they're working to increase coverage and capacity in the region while boosting data download speeds with 4G LTE coverage. Specifically, they have a new tower online in Stoddard as of late November of last year. I'm paraphrasing. And there's another site along Route 9 that will support Antrim and Hillsborough with an estimated online time of August of 2020. Additionally, we forecast the cell tower in West Chesterfield to come online in December of 2020, and they're looking at 2 other acquisitions in Hillsborough and Keene for 2021. So just some updates on wireless coverage from AT&T. So,
Having been
Rod.
an alumni of AT&T, I will tell you that a lot of that is aspirational. So cross your fingers, but don't hold your breath.
Okay, so under next steps, doesn't sound like there are any other updates. From our end, we'll share out these materials to you and the group. Especially the event coming up next week. As someone who attended a conference that was related to broadband and the Community Reinvestment Act and included some folks from USDA, I think you'd probably enjoy what that program's about, especially with the Reconnect application being open. So we'll get those presentation materials out and that event announcement. Other items people would like to bring up to coordinate or share information? I think everybody is.
Maybe a recap after town meeting?
Mhm. That's, yeah, our next meeting, if we're targeting kind of every other month, would be following town meeting, maybe early April. So that could be a timely topic to cover on the agenda. Are there other agenda topics people would like to hear an update on, or something new around the April timeframe? Okay.
Yeah, I
Todd?
would say feel free. At this group, I think the intention is to help members on topics that have interest to you all. So if things come up, after this meeting, feel free to reach out to us and we can maybe help organize. Maybe it's a presentation with someone who has information that
I think material for people who are just starting a starter pack with a checklist in it.
That would be
some
awesome.
contacts with the other towns that are already further down the road that may be willing to help some of the other folks with information and with some advice about how to proceed.
Yeah.
This is a very complex subject. Each town is a little bit different because of the select boards, but the basic outline is the same that everyone has to follow. But I don't think any of that information is getting out to a lot of the different towns that are interested. They don't know where to start.
Yeah.
So a starter kit would be very helpful, I think.
And would need to be updated fairly often because you all have options available now, like bonding, and the Chesterfield monitor that we never had available.
Right.
So at least once a year, maybe do an update.
Oh, at least, yeah. Probably every quarter would be, with all the legislation pending and all of the new possibilities. But that I think is the missing element right now.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, there's a lot of experience that's been gained over the last 1 or 2 years, but it's mostly in people's heads at this point.
Yeah.
So.
And it's in pockets.
Yeah.
This is kind of soft information, but I'm on the Hancock committee, and I started to do a chart to show what each town was doing, what stage it was at, which company it was talking to. And I got the information just sort of through these meetings and mostly ledger transcript, which is what I'm trying to keep up with. But is that something that you all would be interested in keeping? I could show you sort of a format I started. Would this be of any use? I thought for our town it would be useful to, well, of course our committee, but our select board, our planning board, and when it comes time, if we do reach that point to make a pitch to the taxpayers, the citizens, to tell them what other towns are doing and where they are. And it'd be nice to have all that information in one place. I don't know if anybody else sees that.
No, that's a good point, particularly the public benefit calculation and presentation, because that's going to be crucial to having anything passed within the town.
Yeah, the real estate
Yeah,
number
the real
I heard
estate
today
number.
was the first time I'd heard that. I mean, I knew that was a piece, but I hadn't heard of $5,000 adding to value. Is that good?
Yeah, for our, yeah. So you have to, in order to bond, you have to write a document that the government, town government buys into, says this is the value to the town of this improvements. And you can do that, hard calculations, based on improvements of real estate values, which we did. I think we, if I remember right, I did the calculation on real estate value increases to the town be $4.5 million, based on data that was obviously underestimating the aspect. And you can also add in the non-tangible stuff like business improvements, bring businesses. And all the town government has to say is, yes, we agree with this. Then you have to present that at certain meetings, at certain times, or notarize and everything, and that's where you have to make sure you hit that timeline of things.
And it has to be submitted to the bond bank.
Yes.
Yeah, and so the amount of that estimate has to be greater than the total cost of the project, the town's contribution and the provider's contribution. And I found it very easy to hit that threshold very easy.
You'll see all the warrant articles have the total project cost. It's not just the bond cost.
Yeah, yeah,
but the
they
total
warned us
project
about
cost.
that.
That's DRA
And
requirement.
we did it the same way.
It's kind of unfortunate, but.
Walpole did the same thing, only we had a sliding scale from, up, from, I think it was, the base was 25 meg, and then it was 50 meg, then 75, and then a gig or something. But the benefit to the towns went anywhere from like $4.5 million, almost to $10 million.
Mm.
And we can back that up with hard numbers from a couple of universities that publish statistics on real estate improvement.
Is it a new one since the one I had, or?
Same
One, okay.
Same one.
I don't know if they've updated, because it was the biggest problem in that analysis was the underestimate, basically, because they only had census block data. And
Yeah.
census block data tended, in the model, tended to underestimate the actual true value of the real estate.
And you can overlay that with your own data too.
I'm concerned, where do you, and Brad has offered to help us, and John in Westmoreland, gracious with their time. But the flow chart, for the, we newbies, you start here and then you have to go here and here, and the timelines, where do you get that information other than
Our
calling
bond
Brad
council,
every other day?
the Walpole Bond Council that we engaged gave us that
So
checklist,
when
and
they'll-
gave us that
From the council.
timeline. Right, and you need to set that within each town, because each town has a little bit different requirements. If you're an SB2 town, it's different than if you're a non-SB2 town. So you need to know.
Our bond council did the same thing.
Yeah.
In fact, we did a little RFP for bond council and solicited information as part of it, and we got a lot of help that way.
You don't work with the bond council until after you've got your RFI back, correct?
Oh,
You can start
you
anytime.
can start anytime.
Yeah.
Sooner the better, typically.
When I meet with you, I'll go through the full schedule. But on the SW, or whatever, Regional Planning's website, there is a presentation I put together about a year ago, which went through all the steps and describes all that, and that's available on the website.
I would mention anecdotally, of all the emails we've received encouraging us to continue our project in Lyme, other than subscribers who are saying what crappy service they have now, the most frequent source is real estate agents who will say, I could do so much better if you had broadband. So if you want somebody to stand up and push broadband, talk to a local real estate agent.
So I'll point out, I had an interesting conversation with a real estate agent in town, and she said that, a lot of people move to rural areas, towns, and they don't even think about asking the question about broadband coverage until they bought the house, and then they're really ticked off and they move out or whatever. And so she's actually found it as a thing saying, this is the issues. We have this coverage in our town. You can come to our town rather than the other town because this is available. And the real estate agents are the, and I'll tell you, in the last year, I had more phone calls from real estate agents than I have from anybody else. People who were buyers were actually calling me to ask about what the real coverage was, what the timeline was, things like that. So the real estate agents is, and that's where you get right into property values. Interesting thing is when you look at the appraisal values of the houses, the state does not allow the calculation of broadband coverage into the appraisal value of a house. Yes. Well, but if you didn't have coverage, your tax rate should be lower.
True.
Okay? But the broadband coverage is not included in the assessment value of people's houses in the state of New Hampshire.
Why won't we penalize for having?
Well, the good thing about tax rates though in broadband is it sort of supports the idea of fiber everywhere, because it doesn't really matter what the values are as long as they rise and fall together. It's when you start getting skewing that it changes the
Well, the
tax.
problem is when you have people in town that have 25-3 coverage and people have town that only have dial or nothing at all. And so now the people who don't have it are paying a higher assessed value.
Well, true.
Well, I forgot to say to me with Carole, if you're gonna, no matter what broadband you put in, if it's wireless, you still gotta have fiber for the backhaul. So why bother? Why not just
especially true in hilly, wooded towns, of which we all have.
So for the resources Brad was talking about, where he had a presentation on the whole process, documented the public benefit analysis, that was from our April 22nd meeting, just for the record. Okay, well, we have a couple of topics that I heard about. Some others that we didn't cover that came up last time were checking in what's going on in Carroll County, interest in information about pole attachments and ownership and rights and what's going on in New Hampshire relative to those things. Other funding mechanisms for broadband, like New Hampshire Community Development Finance Authority, the Community Reinvestment Act. Those are others we've been asked to kind of consider and might pull you closer to the next meeting time. But we want to start now in locating who's available for an April timeframe meeting and get things together. Great. Well, I don't think there's no other agenda items, so I think we're adjourned and can feel free, of course, to network. If you didn't sign in, appreciate you doing so on your way out.
Fix your expert. 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 Fix your expert.